Welcome to Canada Talks Archery. I'm your host, Kelly Taylor. Canada Talks Archery is proud to have PSE Archery as its presenting sponsor. Check out its latest bow, the Shootdown Pro, designed to have repeatable high performance for target archers while offering the speed and comfort demanded by hunters. Go to psearchery.com or visit your local authorized retailer. If precision is your aim, PSE is your game. And today we're proud to have Austin Taylor join us for the podcast. And if the last name sounds familiar, there's a reason for that. Hi, Austin. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. So we're sitting at our dining room table because, of course, you're my son. And proud to have you with us and proud of all your accomplishments in archery. Why don't you run through a few of them for us?
Well, this year I was awarded Rookie of the Year in ASA. I was able to make a couple of shoot downs and get third place at both of the shoot downs that I made this year. And then for indoors, I had a fairly good indoor season as well. Had a good showing at Lancaster for my first pro tournament. Vegas didn't go exactly my way, but I still had a PR at Vegas. And then I made my first pro shoot down at the NFA Indoor Nationals, which that felt great to finally make one.
Yeah, and that probably didn't go the way you wanted it to, but it's a high pressure cooker situation, isn't it? All right, so you're starting off maybe your second last year in collegiate archery, and you just got back from the Mid-South Conference 3D Championships. How'd that go?
I had a lot of fun. First round went pretty good. I shot 30 up, and then the second round started off good, and then just made a couple mistakes, but ended up finishing second in qualification. And then in the shoot down, I was able to get third.
So if you're not going into the shoot down in first place, you got to hit some 14s, don't you?
Not in that one. Everybody gets put back to zero in that, so it was pretty much just everyone started at the same spot.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about for this podcast, and what was probably most interesting to our listeners, all the little tips and tricks that you've learned over the years. Anybody who saw my Facebook post from the Alberta ASA Classic, I learned a few lessons about the ASA game the hard way. It's probably the best way to learn them, particularly about equipment, lighting, being able to see the target, what size aperture to use in the peep housing, that kind of thing. And then you made a comment that it took you 2 years to figure out your setup for ASA. So tell us about that. How did that come about? The
main reason I think it took me 2 years was I was a little hard-headed and I want to figure out everything on my own. And it really just came down to also me not having everything that I needed at the start to play with everything to get it exactly how I want it to be and how I needed it to be for known pro. When I first started ASA back when I started college, I really had zero experience in 3D archery, aside from some of the local 3D shoots that we shot here in Manitoba, but a lot of them were just with my hunting bow, and at that point I'm just trying to fling arrows into the 10 ring and not super focused on just hitting an 11 or a 12. I was just there to have fun for those ones. But yeah, the first one that I shot was the Collegiate 3D Regionals, and that was on the old course, which is still the hardest course that I've ever shot for 3D archery wise, just because everything was uphill, and every shot was you're standing in a bright open field and shooting into shadows, and if you don't have a scope setup dialed in, then you're in for a world of hurt on a course like that. And that's kind of where I started changing and tinkering and just figuring out what was going to work best for me. And I went down the path of ASA archery right after that, and that is when I started picking up a little bit more info from the people that I was shooting with and the vendors, and buying the necessary equipment to start fine-tuning exactly what I was wanting to improve upon on my scope and my peep setup. So for starters, I was I was using a pretty old scratched up lens, and obviously that does not help when you're trying to see as much as you can, as clearly as you can. So I bought a new lens, and then with that I went to a lens power higher than what I had shot before. So then I started dealing with not being able to see clearly out of it just because I didn't have a clarifier set up. And then once I figured out, okay, I'll buy a clarifier, I bought the wrong clarifier, so I could see clearly through the lens, but I couldn't clearly see my pin. It was just a blur. And then that's when I had to buy a bunch of different clarifiers to figure out which ones worked best for me. And then after that, it was figuring out which aperture to use. And that took me a little while to figure out exactly what I wanted. And I ended up having to drill out an aperture to be in between one of the stock sizes that come from Hamskea, just so that it would help clear up my pin just a little bit while still having the aperture that I needed to have the target clear through the lens.
Let's just bring our listeners up to speed. The clarifier is a lens that goes in the peep housing. The power of clarifier that you need is based on the power of the lens in your scope plus the distance from the peep to your scope. So it varies from archer to archer.
Yeah, and it also has a lot to do with your eyes too, because a lot of my friends that I shoot with are able to run a stronger powered clarifier to help clear up their scopes while also still being able to see their pin clearly. But for me, going into the A+ clarifier from Hamskea, that anything past that and even the A+ is starting to blur out my pin, and a B would be just having my pin being super blurry. And if you don't know how the Hamskea system works, it starts at an A-, which would be the weakest, and then A, and then A+. So, and I think it goes to like C or maybe even C+. And just being like in the A+, I'm not super far into the clarifier system, and that's where my eyes start to blur out the pin. So there's a lot of stuff that I can't just say go and use the A+ clarifier and it's going to be perfect for everybody, because it just won't. It's something that you guys are going to have to play with a few different ones and see exactly what works best for you. And it might be too that you have to play with both. Well, you will have to play with both the clarifier and the aperture just to get everything exactly how you want it to be.
Because the thing about the ASA game, particularly in some places like London or I think Metropolis can be pretty dark as well, is that one, you can barely see the target at the best of times, and trying to figure out where to land the arrow. You need to be able to see clearly, and you need to be able to get the right amount of light through to your eye in order to put the pin where you want it to be. That's one of the things I found out in Alberta, because I did the first round and it was a nightmare. I used my 4X and an A clarifier, and I went to a good friend of Canada Talks Archery, Brady Haslam, and of X-Shot Archery, and I said, Brady, can you loan me a 6X lens and a B clarifier, please? And he did, and that was a come to Jesus moment, because suddenly I could see where I was aiming, which was a huge improvement.
If your scope setup, like if you feel like it's so bad that you just have to switch, obviously go ahead and switch, and then you'll just see an improvement right away if you go to kind of like a standard setup, and then after that is when you can start fine-tuning everything that you're wanting to try, and just making sure that you can see everything that you're wanting to be able to see through your scope. Because especially most of the targets on the regulation targets per year, even in the dark, they're not too terrible to aim at. But if you're getting into like a dark shooting lane and a dark target, like those pigs, or I think they even brought the mule deer back this year, which it's more of like a dark green deer for the foam, which can make it a little bit trickier when it's dark out too. That's when you're going to notice a whole lot more definition in the target through your scope compared to just a thrown together scope setup that you just happen to have.
When we were in Sundre, the target that gave most people the problem is one that we're probably not going to see anymore, and that's the one where the set up so it looks like the moose is walking through a swamp. Mm-hmm. Because it's a huge target with no legs underneath it, because it's looking like it's up almost up to its belly in water, and then it's got a really tiny vitals area as well.
Yeah. Luckily for me, that is not a regulation target, so I don't have to shoot that in known pro. And I think, pretty sure they got rid of it in Alberta.
It was one of the ones they were auctioning off.
One of the ones they auctioned off, and
yeah,
everybody was super happy about that. I can't remember who got it. It might have been Jamie, but yeah, that one was definitely a tricky one, because you look through your scope and all you see is brown. The only way you know where to aim is if there's a different arrow in the target.
Yep, and even through the binoculars, it was kind of hard to make out the scoring rings.
Yeah.
Yeah. My nemesis on that course was the Black Panther, because it was in a bit of a tunnel.
Yeah, the Black Panther is definitely a tricky one. If it's lit up a little bit, there's that muscle right above the upper, and depending on which way it faces, it's either a little bit high and left or a little bit high and right, that I try to play off of. Or like if it's really lit up, then I can just see the ring. But yeah, the Black Panther can be tricky when it's a super dark tunnel that you're shooting through.
Well, and that's the other thing that you have to learn about the ASA game is where to shoot, because it's not necessarily intuitive.
Yeah.
And you have to spend some time shooting those targets, and figure out where you need to put the dot in order to get the arrow to land.
Yeah, and that just comes with experience, knowing where to aim, and a lot of people call it area aiming when you can't necessarily see what you're aiming at, but you just have the experience to know this is roughly where the lower 12 or the upper 12 is, or the IVO if you're playing it safe. It's something that comes from shooting those targets a little bit, and just going off the experience that you have.
When we were making that 13-hour trek to Sundre, we were listening to the John Dudley podcast, and one of them was Judging with Jack.
That was Bow Junkie, not John Dudley.
Bow Junkie, yeah. The one line that stuck out for me, because we both shoot known, and this podcast was all about judging, but the one line that stuck out for me was control the direction of your miss. Yeah. And that applies in known as well, isn't it? And you mentioned to me that you tend to call almost all the uppers.
Yes. So I started doing this a couple of years ago at collegiate nationals, strictly because the couple tournaments before then I was shooting at lowers, and pretty much every miss that I had was low. Like if I made a bad shot, I dip low, and obviously if you're shooting at a lower, you don't want to miss low. So then at that point I was like, you know what, let's just change the strategy completely, call every single upper before the round starts, and just run with it. And that was actually I believe the collegiate nationals that I had won. So obviously it worked, and I just been running with that strategy since then. And then this year in pro, I was doing the same thing. Started off really good, shot decent in London, shot decent in Foley at the start of the year, and then in Fort Benning, I was able to make that shoot down, and then in where was it? It was in Louisiana, where I was just having arrows are like the tiniest bit out the top. Like I feel like I made a great shot, and the arrowhead line just a 16th inch out the top of the upper 12. So in London, I switched up my game plan a little bit from then, and if I range the target for, let's say, 48.5, I would dial my sight to 48.3 or 48.4, just so that if I did end up having an arrow that, like if it broke good and I felt like it should hit the 12, but it was on the top side of my group, it would still be in the upper 12. And then obviously I'm controlling the miss to go low into the 10 ring instead of going high into the 8. And that was the second shoot down that I made when I started implementing that system.
So let's talk a little bit about your setup. It's Dominator Duo 40. You're shooting the Firewire strings.
Yeah.
And the Hamsky Peep.
Hamsky Peep. I have the Trinity, the Hamsky Trinity Arrow Rest, True Ball, Abyss Flexes. The release I'm shooting, then I'm using the Excel Achieve XP, and then my scope is the Shrewd Nomad 41, I think is the size of it, somewhere around there, and then a 6 power X-Shot lens. The Dominator set at 67 pounds, and I'm shooting a gold tip triple X out of that, so that's a 27 series arrow, and that was the one change I made after Foley. I don't know why I keep saying London. After Foley, where I felt like I was just barely missing the 12 ring, so I built up some triple X's for Fort Benning, and that was the first one I made, so I just stuck with it, and since then I haven't changed anything on that bow besides for my D-loop. I had to switch that out recently because it was starting to fray, but other than that, the sight has stayed the exact same. I haven't needed to change my sight tape at all or anything on the bow. It was very nice this year having a bow that I was just 100% confident in, knowing I could pick it up, go out, and compete at the level I needed to compete at.
So your triple X arrows, what's your point weight?
They have 140 grains in the tip, and then for my fletchings, I'm using TAC 225 in a 4 fletch. And this is the first time I've used a 4 fletch before, and they seem to shoot really well. I have no complaints.
Well, a 4 fletch is one of the reasons you might want to use a drop away rest, but with a 4 fletch you pretty much need to, right?
Yeah, and like you can shoot if you have a Bitzenberger jig. They have that option of a 75-105 fletching configuration, so it's kind of like an X-wing, and you can shoot those ones off of a blade if you don't have a super heavy helical. And I had actually built up some X cutters in that configuration right before Foley, and then I never shot them. They just ended up staying in my arrow box because I switched over to the triple X's for the next one.
Yeah, and those X cutters are the ones in my quiver now.
Yeah.
So, speaking of arrows, there are some people out there that say you should clock your arrows to determine their spin before you choose the direction of the helical. There's a lot of people that say that that's nonsense. Where do you stand on that?
I have never done that, and it kind of, like, if you think about it, it makes sense to do it. It's just one less thing to really worry about downrange, but also a lot of times ignorance can be bliss. You just go out there and shoot your bow. I don't know how much clocking your arrows would help. I don't know if clocking my arrows would help at all. Maybe they are clocked properly. I have no idea.
Well, I mean, you've got 50-50 chance, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the triple X's use a slightly different configuration for indoors, heavier point weight.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a lot of hand wringing that goes on over the subject of spine and point weight and all that. And our experience seems to suggest that for indoors, at least, where it's 18 meters, that's less of a concern than it might be for outdoors.
Yeah, it's. I think a lot of it has to do with the size of arrow. Like, if you're shooting a triple X, the arrow is a lot bigger and it's a lot easier to tune because of that. It may just because there's a lot more wiggle room because of the size there. You can get the bow to tune easier because of that, compared to something like a Pierce Tour or an X10 or a Revelation, where they're a little bit more finicky and you want to have the proper spine for them. But in my experience with those triple X's, even though it's I don't even know what spine, I think it's a 150 or a 100, they shoot really good, and it didn't matter if I was shooting the arrow out of my 67 pound 3D bow or my indoor bow that was at about 58 or 59 pounds. They were just super easy to get tuned and to get grouping really well.
It seems to me as though, I talked to a bunch of people like Alan Gunter and other people like that. It seems to me as though for indoors, one of the most important things is making sure the fletching stabilizes the arrow as quickly as possible.
And that's why you see pretty much everybody using a bigger fletching, like 3 inches and bigger. For the majority of people, that's what they're using for indoors, just to help stabilize the arrow. And you don't really need to worry about wind drift in indoors, so having that big fletching is not going to hinder you in that regard. But I think that's what you're seeing a lot of people using 4-fletch now too, is just to get a little bit more stabilization out of the arrow as soon as it leaves the bow. Which I might try 4-fletch this year too for indoors. Just see how it goes. I need to build up some new indoor arrows soon anyways.
Some triple X's?
Yeah.
So for your outdoor, like for your 3D arrows, the triple X's, you're using smaller vanes than you would indoors?
Yeah. Mainly because even though ASA in qualification, there generally isn't very much wind, and most of the time there's zero wind just from where we're shooting. But in the shoot downs, there's a little bit of wind. Like the 2 I made were outdoors, and they were a little bit breezy, and that smaller vane will help just a little bit more in the wind than a bigger one, from what I found. Now, saying that, a 27 series arrow does not fly well in the wind at all, so taking any little help that you can get, if you are shooting a 27, is definitely a good idea.
Now, are you required to shoot the same arrows in the shoot down that you shoot in the qualification round?
No, you can switch whatever you feel like, but I just did not want to tinker with the bow because of how well it was shooting.
So we've seen maybe more now than perhaps earlier, where if you're in a tournament where you have the scoring switching to inside out, whether it's the NFAA Indoor Nationals or the Lucky Dog, you'll see some people will switch to a skinny arrow.
Yeah.
Just so they don't catch the line. Have you done that?
I have done that, actually, and I was at NFA Indoor Nationals. So I was shooting my triple X's for qualification, and then I had built up some Pierce Tours specifically for the shoot down. And what I had done is I'd taken my outdoor arrows from the year prior and I put a little bit bigger of a vane on them. So they, I was laughing at when I was doing it. I was like, man, these are going to be some really nice hunting arrows when I'm done with them. Just because of there was a Pierce Tour with a 225 tack, and they shot really well in indoors at 20 yards. And what I did for then is, at the time I was shooting a blade rest, and I just swapped out the blade that I was using for a freak show blade, which was one of those really narrow blades made for skinny arrows. And then with the new PSE 220 system, all I needed to do was swap out the shims for a different set, and those Pierce Tours were shooting perfect bullet holes. So it was super easy. Everybody was laughing at me like for what I was doing right after I shot my 120Xs. I just had my little toolbox with me, put in the new blade, swapped out the shims, and I was ready to shoot in 2 minutes because of how easy that PSE system is.
That PSE system is pretty slick.
It's really slick. I've been really enjoying to use that system just because of how easy it is and how quickly you can make little adjustments and get your bow tuned up.
So one of the things that I won't say it surprised me, but it did stand out when I was asking you for advice for setting up my Dominator Duo for the triple X's. You suggested putting the rest and the D-loop on so that the center line of the shaft was at the top of the burger hole. How did you come to that conclusion?
What I do right when I get a new bow is I will make I'll set it to where the bow previously like the bow from the previous year where that's the same draw length and peep height and draw weight, just holding weight, whatever my previous bow was set at, I'll set it to that. But what I change is, or not really change, but what I start up doing is I use a lot bigger knock ties. So instead of using like, so what I do is I'll use like a center serving size serving for my knock ties and just tie them in roughly. And I'll pull back the bow and I'll shoot a bunch of arrows through it and see what the bow's doing. And then I'll take the D-loop off and just screw those knock ties up or down the string just to get a different knock height. And then I'll put the D-loop back on, change my peep height to where whichever distance I move the knock tie, I'll move the peep the same just so it feels the same. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll pull the bow back a bunch of times and shoot it and see what the bow's doing. And a lot of the times you'll find that moving that knock tie up and down really changes the feel of the bow. So if your bow's dipping low or just holding low and you don't really know what to do or what to change, rather than just dumping a bunch of weight on your back bar or taking a ton off your front bar, just move your knock point up a little bit, and that can help with that.
So one of the things obviously that you've done a lot of is experimentation.
Yes.
You know, so if it's giving yourself a wide knock point so you can move things up and down, or playing with weights, or playing with clarifiers and peep apertures and all that, there's a ton of experimentation, but it all has to come back to what is working for that particular archer, isn't it? There's no such thing as one size fits all.
No, because everybody's form is different, and how everybody shoots is different, right? Like I shoot a thumb, but I have a very light trigger, so I just let my thumb curl around the the trigger, and then it basically locks into place, and I start pulling through, and then my shot will break relatively quickly. But there's other guys they'll use a hinge, and they'll pull back, and they'll rotate the hinge rather than pulling through, and then there's other guys that'll pull through the hinge. So it really depends on what style of shot you have, and all that changes what you're going to need to do to the bow.
So are there any telltale clues that people can look at? Is it grouping size that suggests they might need to tweak something here or there? Is it, you mentioned, are you dipping down a lot? Is it where it lands? Is it how it feels? What do you go by, or what do you suggest people go by?
Everything. I feel like a lot of people. There's a couple things to this. I feel like a lot of people, they tinker too much, right? They think that it's got to be the bow's fault. Well, the bow's it's just a machine, right? Like it's the person operating it that needs to be on point. And if you're spending too much time tinkering, then you're obviously not spending a ton of time practicing. And practice is going to be the number one thing that you're going to have to do to get better. It's not just, my bow is doing this today, so I'm going to tear it apart and change everything, and then maybe it'll be better. You got to put the reps in first and see exactly what everything's doing before you just start moving everything, right?
Because it seemed as though you end up with bad form chasing bad setup. Exactly. After bad form, after bad setup.
That's what I found in college is, like, after shooting for a while, if my dot is doing something indoors, like if my hold isn't exactly what it needs to be, I kind of know what to try to get it to where it needs to be. So you'd see me just running back and forth between the bow room and the range, just tinkering with little things. But then that translated into a lot of people now, this doesn't feel perfect, so they're running back and forth also, and it can also be detrimental, right? Like you could change something for the worse, and then you can't get it back to where it was, and you have to start all over. So what if you do change a lot? Have a notebook and mark down every single change that you did, because there was times when I was doing this that it would be detrimental, and I had to try and figure out what I did to erase what I did and get it back to where it was feeling okay, and then I could branch off from there in a different direction.
So basically, give yourself a roadmap back to ground zero.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's definitely like first things first, like practice over everything. And then if you feel like your bow isn't feeling the best, then you can start tinkering with stuff. Don't just shoot a few shots and then go, oh, this isn't working, and change something, and then go shoot a few shots and then say, oh, this isn't working, I'm going to go change a different thing. And then sooner or later you're gonna look back and you have no way of knowing of what you did, how to get back to where the bow originally was. And it's taken me a couple days sometimes to try and figure out, okay, like, what did I do? And I sometimes wake up right before I fall asleep going, oh, I did this, and I need to put this back into the bow. So I have to make a note on what to do the next day. But I recommend just practicing. Definitely just practice more than you tinker. And when you do tinker, do one thing at a time.
See the
and
effect.
Make a note, see the effect, and shoot that over a big period, right? Because a lot of the times too, like if you take an ounce off or put an ounce on, those first few shots, they feel great. But then after you shoot it for a while, you're like, okay, yeah, this isn't actually what I want, right?
A lot of times when I'm teaching at Heartland Archery, I'll pick up a rental bow, and a student will say it's shooting way right, and I'll pick it up, I'll take a look at it, and sure enough, someone has, they've been shooting it way left, so they moved the sight way left. And then anyone picks it up and starts shooting it with something approaching decent form, obviously it's going to be way off. So I think that's a pretty good example of tinkering that's just chasing bad form.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that you might feel like you need to fix with the bow can just be fixed by changing your form a little bit. Like if you're holding low, it could just be your shoulder. Like your shoulder position's off, and that could it's hard to tell by yourself when you're shooting that, oh, your shoulder's a little bit high.
Helps to have a buddy.
It helps to have somebody there that kind of knows what to look for.
So when it comes to form, the one thing I've noticed is that sometimes the holding pattern diagnoses that you'll sometimes see online can help diagnose some bad form too.
Yeah.
Right? Because, we know that a long draw length is going to give you a really floaty hold, and a short draw length will give you a really jerky hold. So if everything's shooting fine, and then, one moment you realize that it's really jerking, maybe check your stance. Maybe you've closed up your stance a little bit too much, and now you've got too short of a draw length. Because you've changed the geometry of your body a little bit, right?
Yeah. Every little thing definitely changes how the bow feels, and that's why you see a lot of pros saying that their bow shoots great in practice, but whenever you get tournament nerves, it doesn't feel the same. And that's just because they obviously have changed something unknowingly in a tournament or in a high pressure situation. And also, it's the nerves from a high pressure situation will make the bow not feel as good as it does in practice.
Well, I think it comes back to what our friend George Riles always says about practice versus tournaments, and that is either way, you're just shooting bow.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's probably mentally one of the hardest obstacles to overcome is that you shouldn't be changing things just because you're now scoring. I always joke that the 9 deadliest words in archery at the Vegas tournament are, ladies and gentlemen, this is your first scoring round.
Yeah, for us archers, our worst enemy is often ourselves, and the pressure that we put on ourselves to do good at a tournament is often our downfall.
So, do you have any tricks that you use to just get yourself into a just shoot bow?
No, all you have to, it just comes from experience. Because it's not like I don't get nervous at tournaments. It's like in Lancaster, obviously I was super nervous as my first pro tournament of the year. But it's just working through the nerves and shooting enough tournaments to know how to work through nerves, to know that like you can work through nerves, and being comfortable and confident in your tournament prep.
Now, one of the things that we tell archers in Manitoba, and I think this has a lot to do with some of the success that Manitoba archers have had on the world stage, is always shoot outside your comfort zone. Don't always just go to Selkirk Archers and Bow Hunters and shoot the 720 there, and then go to Sanford and shoot the 720 there, and just shoot with your friends, because that's not going to put any pressure on you, right?
Yeah. Try
to get to like an Iowa Pro-Am, Rushmore Rumble, Lancaster, Vegas, all these other tournaments that will sort of give you the experience that you need to be able to just say, yeah, the nerves are there, but who cares?
Yeah, and you don't have to go to the big tournaments too. Like shoot all the local ones too. Like there are some nerves at local tournaments, and especially like the bigger ones, right? Like I know Heartland used to do a Triple Crown series where a lot of the guys in Manitoba would shoot him because there was a little bit of money involved, and like there's obviously nerves there that you would have to work through, and you just got to get to as many tournaments as you can to be able to know what you're going to do in a tournament, how you react, and how your bow's going to react.
All right, very good, Austin. Thank you for being on Canada Talks Archery. What's next for you? Obviously, it's the 3D Nationals coming up in about a week and a half.
Yeah, going down to Foley, Alabama for the Collegiate 3D Nationals. Hopefully I'll be able to practice, and the weather will be a little, will cooperate up here. It's not as warm up here as it is down in Kentucky where I went to school at. But I think a lot of it too is I've really been enjoying this off season, and being able to be home and to be able to hunt has been great, and I've been having a lot of fun with that. And I think I gotta kind of rein it in and realize, okay, I have another tournament. I gotta practice for this one too, instead of just hunting every single day and only shooting 3 or 4 times a week at the target at the cabin.
It is important to take a break sometimes, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and like the tournament season is quite a long one, and there are some tournaments, like some indoor tournaments, that coming up in November and I think December maybe. They're on the bigger side, but having a couple weeks just to go hunting and fishing or just unwinding is definitely nice, and I've really been enjoying that. I haven't had that in I don't even know how long, because I would shoot all of the big tournaments, and those ones would pretty much end in August or September, and then I was right into the collegiate stuff. And down at school, I loved shooting. I loved competing in college. But there is no break, right? All the college seasons just kind of mold into one, and you just got to keep rolling. But being back home and doing my master's program online, it's allowed me to take a little bit of a break. I'm still shooting, but I'm enjoying my other hobbies a lot more now too.
Well, it's pretty relaxing to sit in a stand and just hear the rustle of the leaves around you as you're waiting for that big buck to come in, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, very good, Austin. Thanks very much. That's another episode of Canada Talks Archery. I'm Kelly Taylor, your host.